The candles on my birthday cake flickered in the dim light of our cramped apartment living room, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the handful of people who had bothered to show up. 30 candles. 30 years of life, and what did I have to show for it? A part-time job at a local bookstore, a husband who worked double shifts at the factory just to keep us afloat, and in-laws who never missed an opportunity to remind me of my failures. "Make a wish, Sarah," my husband Mike said softly, squeezing my shoulder. His eyes held that familiar mixture of love and worry that had become his default expression over the past few years. The financial strain was wearing on both of us, but he never blamed me. His parents, however, were a different story. I closed my eyes, made my wish, the same one I'd been making for years, and blew out the candles. The room erupted in polite applause, but I caught the whispered conversation between Mike's mother, Patricia, and his father, Robert, standing near the kitchen doorway. 30 years old and still working part-time at a bookstore, Patricia murmured, shaking her head. "I told you she'd never amount to anything when Michael brought her home." Robert nodded grimly. "At least our son has a steady job. God knows what would happen to them if he didn't." Their words cut deep, though I pretended not to hear them. These weren't new sentiments. For the 5 years Mike and I had been married, his parents had made their disapproval of me crystal clear. I wasn't educated enough, ambitious enough, successful enough for their precious son. The fact that I dropped out of college to help support my sick mother apparently marked me as a failure in their eyes forever. "Time for presents," announced my best friend Jenny, trying to inject some enthusiasm into the increasingly awkward gathering. She'd driven 3 hours to be here, knowing how important this milestone birthday was to me, especially given how difficult the past year had been. Mike handed me the first gift, a small wrapped box from him. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny book pendant. "For my bookworm," he said with a gentle smile. "I know things are tight, but I wanted you to have something special." I fought back tears, knowing he'd probably skipped lunches for weeks to afford even this modest gift. "It's perfect," I whispered, letting him fasten it around my neck. Jenny's gift was next, a spa day voucher. "For when you need to escape reality," she said with a wink. I hugged her gratefully, knowing she understood better than anyone how much I needed some self-care. My sister Lisa had sent a care package from across the country. Homemade cookies, my favorite tea, and a heartfelt card that made me cry. Even my elderly neighbor Mrs. Chan had brought over a small potted orchid, saying it would bring me good luck in my new decade of life. Then came the gifts from Mike's family. His sister handed me a generic gift card to a department store with all the enthusiasm of someone disposing of garbage. His parents presented me with a cookbook titled Budget Meals for Hard Times, the passive-aggressive nature of which was lost on no one in the room. Mike's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, keeping the peace as always. "Well," I said, forcing a smile as I gathered up the wrapping paper, "thank you all for coming. This has been lovely." But as people began to prepare to leave, the doorbell rang. Mike frowned. We weren't expecting anyone else. When he opened the door, a courier stood there with a clipboard and several large packages. "Sarah Mitchell?" the courier asked. "That's me," I said, puzzled. "Special delivery. I need you to sign here." Mike helped carry in 3 substantial packages and an envelope marked, "Urgent, open first." My hands trembled as I tore it open, everyone in the room watching with curiosity. Inside was a letter on expensive letterhead from a law firm in New York. "Dear Ms. Mitchell," I read aloud, my voice growing stronger with each word. "We represent the estate of Ms. Eleanor Hartwell. We regret to inform you of her passing 6 months ago. However, we are pleased to inform you that you have been named as a beneficiary in her will. Ms. Hartwell left specific instructions that these items were to be delivered to you on your 30th birthday, along with this letter." I looked up, seeing the confused faces around me. Eleanor Hartwell, the name was familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. The letter continued. "Ms. Hartwell was deeply moved by the essay you wrote 5 years ago for the Stories That Matter contest sponsored by our literary foundation. Though your piece didn't win the grand prize, Ms. Hartwell personally requested a copy after reading the judge's comments. Your essay about caring for your mother while pursuing your dreams, and the sacrifices you made, touched her profoundly. She saw in you a kindred spirit, someone who understood that true strength comes not from what we achieve, but from what we endure and how we love others through difficult times. My heart began to race. I remembered that essay contest. I'd entered it on a whim during one of the hardest periods of my life, when Mom was going through chemotherapy and I'd had to drop out of school to care for her. I'd written about the books that had sustained me during those dark months, how stories had been my escape and my strength. I'd never heard anything back after submitting it. The first package, the letter continued, contains Ms. Hartwell's personal library collection of first edition novels, which she wanted to go to someone who truly understood the power of literature. The second package contains her collection of vintage typewriters and writing materials. She hoped they might inspire you to continue writing. The third package contains items that will be explained in the enclosed personal letter from Ms. Hartwell herself. With shaking hands, I opened the first package. The room fell silent as I revealed book after book. First editions of classics I'd only dreamed of owning. To Kill a Mockingbird, The Great Gatsby, Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre. Dozens of them, each in pristine condition, each worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Patricia and Robert's whispered criticisms had stopped entirely. Mike's eyes were wide with amazement. Jenny was practically bouncing with excitement. The second package revealed an extraordinary collection of vintage typewriters, a 1920s Royal Quiet Deluxe, a 1950s Smith Corona, a gorgeous 1960s Olympia, along with boxes of high-quality paper, ribbons, and writing supplies. Each typewriter was in perfect working condition, lovingly maintained. But it was the third package that left everyone speechless. Inside were legal documents, bank statements, and another sealed letter. The documents showed that Eleanor Hartwell had established a trust fund in my name, funded with $500,000, specifically designated for pursuing literary endeavors and supporting others who sacrifice for family. The personal letter from Eleanor was handwritten in elegant script. My dear Sarah, if you are reading this, then you have reached your 30th birthday, and I am no longer here to meet you in person, something I regret deeply. Your essay moved me to tears when I first read it 5 years ago. You wrote about sitting by your mother's hospital bed, reading to her from worn paperback novels because you couldn't afford the treatments that might save her, but you could give her the gift of stories, of escape, of hope. You wrote about the dreams you'd put on hold, the education you'd interrupted, the judgments others made about your choices. But what struck me most was your unwavering belief that love and sacrifice are the highest forms of success, even when the world tells us otherwise. I never had children of my own, Sarah. I spent my life building a literary foundation, supporting writers and readers, but I always wondered if my work mattered to real people facing real struggles. Your essay showed me that it did. I have been following your life from a distance. I hope you'll forgive an old woman her curiosity. I know about your mother's passing 2 years ago. I know about your husband's devotion and your part-time work at the bookstore. I know that others have judged you harshly for choices that were actually evidence of your character and strength. The money in this trust is yours to use as you see fit, but I hope you'll consider it a foundation for the dreams you've deferred. Write your book, Sarah. Tell your story. Show the world that success isn't measured by traditional markers, but by how we love, how we sacrifice, and how we persist. The typewriters belonged to famous authors. The Royal was used by Ernest Hemingway, the Smith Corona by Sylvia Plath, the Olympia by Maya Angelou. I collected them over decades, and I want them to inspire your own words. Use them. Write on them. Let their history become part of your story. But most importantly, remember that you have already amounted to something extraordinary. You are a woman who chose love over ambition, family over personal gain, sacrifice over selfishness. In a world that often values the wrong things, you have lived by the right principles. Never let anyone make you feel small for that. I believe in you, Sarah. I believe in your words, your story, your worth. Now I hope you'll begin to believe in yourself. With admiration and hope. Eleanor Hartwell. P.S. There is one more surprise in the bottom of this package. With trembling hands, I reached into the package and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside were contracts. Publishing contracts with Eleanor's Foundation Press, offering to publish a collection of essays about caregiving, family, and finding strength in adversity. There was also a letter from the Foundation's current director, explaining that they wanted to launch a new series called Voices of Sacrifice, and they wanted my story to be the first volume. The room was completely silent now. Even Patricia and Robert stood frozen, their earlier whispers seeming to echo mockingly in the stillness. "There's more," I said, my voice barely a whisper as I read the final documents. "She's left funding for a scholarship program for people who've had to interrupt their education to care for family members. She wants me to help administer it." Mike was the first to move, wrapping me in his arms as tears streamed down both our faces. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. "I've always known how special you are." Jenny was crying and laughing at the same time. "Sarah, do you realize what this means? You're going to be published. You're going to help other people. This is incredible." I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me. My sister Lisa would be so thrilled when I called her. Mrs. Chen was beaming like a proud grandmother. Mike's sister looked stunned but genuinely happy for the first time I could remember. But it was Mike's parents whose reactions interested me most. Patricia's face had gone through a series of transformations: surprise, confusion, and what looked like the beginning of shame. Robert was staring at the legal documents as if he couldn't quite believe they were real. "I don't understand," Patricia finally said, her voice much smaller than usual. "How did this woman even know who you were?" I looked down at Eleanor's letter again, finding strength in her words. She knew because I wrote something that mattered to her. Because I told a story about the hardest time in my life, and she saw value in it. She saw value in me. "But you're just..." Robert started, then stopped himself. "Just what?" I asked, my voice steady now. "Just a part-time bookstore employee. Just a college dropout. Just someone who chose to care for her dying mother instead of pursuing a career." The room was tense now, but I wasn't angry. For the first time in years I felt completely calm, completely sure of myself. "You're right," I continued. "I am all of those things. But I'm also someone who knows the value of sacrifice. I'm someone who understands that success isn't always measured in paychecks or degrees. I'm someone who has lived through real hardship and found ways to help others through theirs." I picked up one of the first edition books, To Kill a Mockingbird, and held it gently. "This book is worth more than I make in 6 months at the bookstore. But the reason Eleanor left it to me isn't because of its monetary value. It's because she knew I understood its real value. The power of stories to change lives, to offer hope, to show us that courage comes in many forms." Patricia's eyes were filling with tears now. "Sarah, we didn't know." "No," I said gently. "You didn't know because you didn't try to know. You saw what you expected to see. Someone who didn't live up to your standards. But Eleanor saw something different. She saw someone worth believing in." Mike took my hand. "What do you want to do now?" he asked. I looked around our small apartment, at the modest life we'd built together, at the incredible gifts spread across our coffee table. "I want to finish the book I started writing 3 years ago. I want to establish that scholarship program. I want to use these typewriters to tell stories that matter. And I want to stay right here with you while I do it," I added, looking directly at Mike. "Because this, us, our life together, the love we've built, this was never the consolation prize. This was always the real treasure." Over the next hour, as people gradually left, Patricia lingered. Finally, when it was just Mike, her, and me, she approached hesitantly. "Sarah," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. I've been wrong about you. Terribly wrong." I looked at this woman who had spent 5 years making me feel inadequate, who had whispered cruel judgments at my birthday party just hours earlier. Part of me wanted to savor this moment of vindication, to let her squirm in her regret. But that wasn't who I was. It wasn't who Eleanor had seen in me. Patricia, I said, I forgive you. But more than that, I understand you. You wanted the best for Mike, and you thought I was holding him back. You measured success the way most people do. By external achievements, by conventional markers. There's nothing wrong with wanting those things. But there's also nothing wrong with choosing different things, I continued. With valuing love over ambition, relationships over recognition, presence over prestige. Eleanor understood that. And now maybe you can too. Patricia nodded, wiping her eyes. Will you tell us about your book when you write it? Of course, I said. It's going to be about all of this, the struggle, the sacrifice, the judgment, and yes, the vindication. But mostly it's going to be about love. About the different forms success can take. About how we measure a life well lived. After everyone had gone and we'd cleaned up, Mike and I sat on our couch surrounded by the extraordinary gifts. The contrast was surreal. Our second-hand furniture and thrift store decorations now sharing space with priceless books and vintage typewriters worth tens of thousands of dollars. Are you okay? Mike asked, pulling me close. This is a lot to process. I leaned into him, feeling the familiar comfort of his embrace. I keep thinking about something Eleanor wrote, that I've already amounted to something extraordinary. For so long I felt like I was waiting for my real life to begin, you know? Like I was in some kind of holding pattern until I could prove myself worthy of respect. And now I realize I was living my real life all along. The years I spent caring for Mom, the quiet moments reading to her, the conversations with customers at the bookstore who were looking for the perfect book to help them through their own struggles. All of that mattered. All of that was success, just not the kind that gets celebrated. Mike was quiet for a moment. I always knew you were extraordinary, he said finally. I just hated that my parents couldn't see it. They see it now, I said. But you know what? Even if they didn't, even if Eleanor had never written that letter, even if these gifts had never arrived, I would still be the same person I was this morning. The same person who chose love over convenience, family over personal ambition, presence over prestige. The same person I fell in love with, Mike added. Exactly. The vindication feels good, don't get me wrong. But it doesn't change who I am. It just confirms what was already true. Over the following weeks, word of my inheritance spread through our small town. The local newspaper ran a story about it, and suddenly people who had barely noticed me before were treating me like a celebrity. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the same person I'd always been, but now that I had money and recognition, I was worthy of attention and respect. But the real changes in my life were more subtle and far more meaningful. I began writing again. Really writing, not just the scattered journal entries I'd managed over the years. Using Eleanor's typewriters felt like connecting with a lineage of writers who had transformed their struggles into art. I started working with a foundation to establish the scholarship program, interviewing applicants whose stories reminded me of my own. There was Maria, who had dropped out of nursing school to care for her disabled brother. There was James, who had given up his teaching degree to help his grandparents keep their farm. There was Aisha, who had interrupted her medical studies when her father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Each story reinforced what Eleanor had seen, that the world is full of quiet heroes, people who make enormous sacrifices without recognition, who choose love over personal advancement and then get judged for it. The scholarship program wasn't just giving people money to return to school. It was validating their choices, honoring their sacrifices, and showing them that their detours were valuable too. My book took shape slowly but surely. I wrote about Mom's illness and death, about the judgment I'd faced, about the strength I'd found in unexpected places. But I also wrote about Mike's unwavering support, about the customers at the bookstore who had taught me as much as any professor could have, about the small acts of kindness that had sustained me through the darkest times. Publishers began reaching out, interested in my story and the scholarship program. Magazine editors wanted interviews. Speaking engagements were offered. It was flattering and exciting but also overwhelming. Remember, Eleanor had written in a follow-up letter I found tucked into one of the books. Success is not about becoming famous or wealthy. though those things may come. Success is about staying true to who you are while using your gifts to help others. Don't let the noise of recognition drown out the quiet voice that guided you here. 6 months after my 30th birthday, my book was published. The Measure of a Life, Stories of Love, Sacrifice, and Silent Strength, became a bestseller almost immediately. But what mattered most to me were the letters from readers. Other caregivers, other people who had made difficult choices and been judged for them, other quiet heroes who finally felt seen and valued. Patricia and Robert became unexpected allies in promoting the scholarship program. Patricia, it turned out, had her own story of sacrifice. She had given up her nursing career when Mike was born because Robert's job required frequent moves. She had spent years feeling like her contributions to the family weren't valued because they couldn't be measured in salary or titles. "I think I resented you because you reminded me of choices I had made," she admitted to me one day over coffee. "I had convinced myself that my sacrifices were different, more necessary, more noble than yours. But the truth is, I was defensive because I wondered if I had given up too much." "There's no wrong choice," I told her. "Only different paths. The problem isn't the choices we make. It's the way society values some choices over others." "That's what your book is about, isn't it?" she asked. "Changing how we think about success and worth." "It's about recognizing that worth was always there," I said. "We just need to learn to see it." A year later, I stood in the same living room where I'd celebrated my 30th birthday, but everything had changed. The apartment was still small, still modestly furnished. Mike and I had decided not to move, not to dramatically change our lifestyle despite the financial windfall. But the walls now displayed framed photos from book readings and scholarship ceremonies. Eleanor's typewriters had places of honor on a new desk where I wrote every morning. The first edition books were carefully displayed in a custom bookcase that had been our one major purchase. But the biggest change wasn't visible in the room. It was in me. I carried myself differently now, spoke with more confidence, looked people in the eye with the certainty of someone who knew her own worth. Not because of the money or the recognition, but because I had finally internalized what Eleanor had seen in me from the beginning. Mike organized another birthday party for my 31st, this time with many more guests, including some of the scholarship recipients, Eleanor's foundation colleagues who had become friends, and even some readers who had become part of our extended community. But the most important people were still the same. Mike, Jenny, my sister Lisa, who flew in for the occasion, Mrs. Chen, and yes, even Patricia and Robert. When it came time to make my wish and blow out the candles, I closed my eyes and thought about what to ask for. A year ago, I had wished for recognition, for validation, for proof that I mattered. Now, I wished for something different. The wisdom to use my platform responsibly, the strength to keep helping others find their voices, and the humility to remember that my worth had never depended on external validation. As I opened my eyes and blew out the candles, I caught Patricia's eye across the room. She was smiling. Not the polite, forced smile I was used to, but a genuine expression of pride and affection. In that moment, I realized that my story wasn't really about proving my critics wrong. It was about proving myself right. Right to value love over ambition, right to choose sacrifice over selfishness, right to believe that quiet strength was just as valuable as loud success. The gifts that evening were different too. Along with thoughtful personal presents from friends and family, there were letters from scholarship recipients, artwork from readers, and a special surprise from the foundation. They had established an annual Eleanor Hartwell Award for Unsung Heroes, and I would help select the recipients each year. But the gift that meant the most was the smallest. A simple card from Mike with just a few words written inside. "To my extraordinary wife, who has always amounted to everything that matters. Happy birthday." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself standing in front of the bookcase holding Eleanor's first editions. I pulled out To Kill a Mockingbird and opened it to the inscription she had written. "For Sarah, remember that real courage is when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway and see it through. You have shown that kind of courage every day of your life. The world is lucky to have you in it. Eleanor." I closed the book and looked around our little apartment, at the life Mike and I had built together, at the evidence of the work I was doing to help others. The whispered words from my 30th birthday party seemed like they belonged to another lifetime. She'll never amount to anything. But they were wrong, and they had always been wrong. I had already amounted to everything that truly mattered. I had amounted to love, to sacrifice, to strength, to compassion, to the quiet heroism of choosing others over myself. The recognition was nice, the money was helpful, the opportunities were exciting, but they were extras, bonuses, gifts that highlighted what was already true. Eleanor had seen it from the beginning. Mike had always known it. And finally, wonderfully, undeniably, I knew it too. I was enough. I had always been enough. And now, with her help from beyond the grave, I was using my story to help others understand that they were enough too. Regardless of what anyone whispered behind their backs, regardless of society's narrow definitions of success, regardless of the voices that tried to make them feel small. As I prepared for bed that night, I sat down at Eleanor's royal typewriter and began typing a letter of my own, to the next recipient of an Eleanor Hartwell scholarship, to the next person who needed to hear that their sacrifices mattered, their choices were valid, their quiet strength was valuable. Dear friend, I typed, the keys clicking satisfyingly under my fingers, if you are reading this, then someone has seen in you what others might have missed. The extraordinary courage it takes to put love before ambition, family before personal gain, others before yourself. They have seen that you have already amounted to something wonderful, even if the world hasn't recognized it yet. The words flowed easily, carrying with them all the love and validation that Eleanor had given me, that I now had the privilege and responsibility to pass on to others. In that moment, typing on a typewriter that had belonged to literary giants, surrounded by books that had sustained me through my darkest hours, living a life that perfectly balanced recognition with authenticity, I knew that this was what success really looked like. Not the moment when the world finally sees your worth, but the moment when you truly understand it yourself, and then dedicate your life to helping others find theirs.